Take a dive with me into the deep Clue Sea. Here we will find our face commander, Morska Undersea Sleuth, that genuinely has no intention of solving any case, ever. Not when there are more clues to be found. Her partner and her partner's partner are Sophia, Dog Detective, and the goodest boy, Tiny. While a couple of land lovers being the secondary commanders of an ocean precon doesn't pass the flavor test, the homage to Scooby-Doo is evident and is worth 1 bonus point. Congratulations. You even get Scooby Snacks when a dog deals combat damage to a player. But forget these two. This review and upgrade will be focusing on the 2/3 green-white-blue Morska. Off the top, she removes your hand size restriction when she's on the battlefield, an effect I can always get behind, but also makes her an easy target for removal when you do have that fistful of cards. She has no innate protection, and the deck only offers a single, very expensive counterspell to keep her safe, so just keep that in the back of your mind. Her second ability will generate a clue token on each of your upkeeps through her investigation, and the final ability gives her 2 +1/+1 counters every time you draw your second card in a turn. This amounts to a possible 8 additional power and toughness in a single rotation, before any counter shenanigans get thrown into the mix. To be clear, that is not something you'll find in this precon, but could be an interesting direction to take the deck. Real quick, take a second, subscribe to the channel. Thanks, boss. Her abilities certainly work in tandem. Clues will get you cards, will get you counters. This precon leans into the clue, or more broadly, token synergies and card draw synergies. There's no better way to demonstrate that than by introducing the best and most expensive reprints you can find in the box. Adrix and Nev, twin casters, are a good old-fashioned token doubler in creature form. Little known fact is that they are actually step twin casters, so keep them away from your washing machines. At the time of recording, this is close to a $20 card, which is right about half the cost of this precon. For the record, the associated price tags for all reprints in this section are the lowest price of printings from sets before MKM, to reflect how valuable the community found them in the recent past. All printings from this set you can expect to be lower in cost. $6 Academy Manufactor would turn the clue token created in your upkeep into a clue, food, and treasure token. In a game of rectangles, more is better. And if you're wondering if this creature, Morska, and the twin casters all share the battlefield, that single clue token in your upkeep turns into 6 total tokens. $15 Benny Brack's Zoologist is a value machine, letting you draw a card every end step if you created a token on that turn. And with Convoke, you can even cast him for free. $10 Chulane, Teller of Tales, and $12 Coma, Cosmo's Serpent are both popular and powerful commanders in their own right. Chulane, while honestly on the very boring side, gives you everything you want, more cards and more lands. Coma can get out of hand, spawning serpents every upkeep that can be sacrificed to fuel its own ability or any other you can brew up. Last creature I'll touch on is $9 Alondra Skydreamer that synergizes with the extra card draw ability on Morska by creating flying drake tokens when you draw your second card each turn. As a possible avenue to victory, your 5th card drawn in a turn will pump up her and all the drakes you've made based on the number of cards you have in your hand. The creature reprints in this deck are the highlight for me, but the sorceries and enchantments got a little love as well. $8 Farewell is a symmetrical board wipe that can hit your choice of 3 different card types and graveyards. For all my standard enjoyers, we all know Sunfall has become the de facto board wipe, but with Incubate tokens in MOM, Map tokens in LCI, and now Clue tokens in MKM, I've got a suspicion the artifact wipe is going to become more and more relevant in that space, meaning more demand, meaning more value. This spell is my bet for the highest percentage valuation jump. The other sorcery is $6 Finale of Revelation. As is the case with all the finale cycle, you're doing the thing the color does, in this case drawing cards, with x equaling 10 being that magic number to do even more fun stuff. It's no Finale of Devastation, but you can draw up some fun stuff with this one too. For the enchantments, we've got $2 Wilderness Reclamation, $3 Teferi's Ageless Insight, and the $4 Mechanized Production. Wilderness Reclamation functionally doubles your mana, which is awesome in this deck if you want to crack a couple clues during an opponent's turn to start cashing in on those draw your second card payoffs. Teferi's Ageless Insight effectively turns a cracked clue token or almost any other drawn card into 2 drawn cards. Mechanized Production is a win condition where you need to control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as each other at the beginning of your upkeep. You'll be doing plenty of investigating, so a win through clue tokens is a realistic scenario, especially if you decide to introduce some instant token generation. So before we go further to discuss the new spells and the upgrade package, I want to recenter on exactly what this deck is trying to do and how well I think it accomplishes it. At the foundation, it's all about creating and leveraging clue tokens. Out of the box, there are 17 ways to make clue tokens and 23 ways to have them pay you off. That comes out to over a 70% chance to have 1 or more clue generators in your opening hand, with a higher percentage of having a payoff. Full transparency, sometimes these will be the same card, like Tireless Tracker. And then with your commander creating them on her own, I can say this deck is pretty successful at this piece. The other theme is drawn card payoffs, which plays into the clues as they offer card draw, but I created a separate payoff bucket for these. Turns out this secondary theme has less payoffs, with only 8 in the deck, including your commander. These are strong payoffs, generally involving token creation that can be triggered every turn, but with this more contextualized, your general mindset should be playing toward your artifact's matter win conditions. Junkwinder is cheaper than its upfront casting cost and stuns non-land permanents when a token ETBs under your control. Whirler Rogue can tap your clue tokens to make a creature of yours unblockable as many times as you'd like until you run out of artifacts to tap or creatures to target. Kappa Cannoneer is again cheaper than he looks and has his own built-in evasion and pump when an artifact ETBs under your control. There are more strewn throughout the deck, and a new spell that fits the bill, but in the interest of time, I'm leaving it there. If you're wondering whether the deck can consistently win games at the precon or upgraded precon power level, my answer is yes. Last recentering point is about the land base. There are 37 total lands, 14 of which always enter the battlefield tapped, 19 producing white, 19 producing blue, and 18 producing green. Lands are always an area needing improvement in precons, and I'm not excited about this out of the box, but I am content with it. Besides, this deck doesn't need to get out to a crazy fast start to win games. It'll gather its advantages little by little every turn, kind of under the surface with a clue token here and an extra card there, until things come to a head 8 or 10 turns in where you can let the fish out of the bag. Now let's get into the 10 non-commander new spells printed for this precon. The highlight spell of the bunch for me is On the Trail. It's actually kind of like Tulane, but it's new, so it's exciting. This 1 and a green enchantment further helps you convert your second drawn card into advantages, letting you ramp by putting a land from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. This deck will be drawing plenty of cards, and while you don't have to discard to hand size thanks to the Commander or Finale of Revelation if you get to that point, there's only 2 payoffs for having a dozen or 24 cards in your hand. An enchantment like On the Trail will get those cards into the action where you can actually make use of them. You wanted more payoffs? Okay. Detective of the Month is a 2/3, 2 and a blue creature that will create a 2/2 detective when you draw your second card each turn. She can also become Ascended, which should be pretty easy in this deck, making your detectives unblockable. There aren't many detectives in the deck, but importantly, Morska, who will be gathering counters on second drawn cards, is a detective. If she's left unchecked, this combination of cards could prove deadly. Maybe the best card to have on the battlefield in tandem with those two is the 3 white and a blue Knowledge is Power enchantment. This gives you a fluctuating power and toughness increase based on the number of cards you've drawn on any given turn. I love that this spell can play offense and defense so effectively, allowing you to instantly react to your opponent's attacking or blocking decisions, sacrificing clue tokens or otherwise drawing cards to punish their play. Serene Sleuth and Innocuous Researcher are a couple more new detective creatures. Honestly, the 1 and a white 2/2 Sleuth seems deliberately designed for MKM precon battles against Nelly Borka and the Blame Game precon. This creature pays you off with clue tokens for all the goated creatures you have, and then relieves them of that burden. It's a good inclusion to combat a specific meta you may exist in, but more broadly, this one doesn't do it for me. Innocuous Researcher, on the other hand, does a lot of work. For 3 and a green, you get a 3/4 creature with an attack trigger that will net you anywhere between 0 and 4 clue tokens, and everyone a drawn card. Usually, letting all your opponents draw a card is ill-advised, but in a deck built like this, the value you get out of those clue tokens and presumably second drawn card will likely outpace the value your opponents are getting. And even then, if you want to avoid all that, which is fair, its other ability is a worse Wilderness Reclamation, letting you untap all your lands at the cost of not being able to cast spells until your next turn. It doesn't say anything about not cracking clues, though. Merchant of Truth is the final detective here, a 2/5 flying creature at 2 and 2 white. The investigation death trigger is strong, but every clue you control having Exalted is sneaky good here. This creature has evasion already built in, and a lot of your win conditions revolve around making your creatures otherwise unblockable. You can keep the pressure up on life totals by swinging alone with the Merchant. If you've got a lot of clues on the battlefield and a pumped up commander, this card is going to be a lot of trouble for your opponents. Ransom Note was also in the Blame Game precon. It's a 1-mana gadget artifact. This deck cares about artifacts, and it's technically a clue, so it fits right in here. Armed with Proof is for sure my flavor win for new spells. It's a 2 and a white enchantment that investigates twice on ETB. Then you can arm your detectives by equipping them with the clue tokens, adding 2 to their power for an equip cost of 2. Like I just said before, this deck cares about artifacts with spells like Kappa Cannoneer and Thought Monitor. Sometimes it'll be best to keep the clues on the battlefield for the time being, and this enchantment can put them to good use. Tangletrove Kelp is the top end of the deck, costing 5 and 2 blue for a 6/6 plant clue creature with Ward 2. Its triggered ability at the beginning of combat turns all the clues you've got into 6/6 creatures until the end of the turn. In the blink of an eye, you could have a board 12 creatures wide with upwards of 70 power just ready to smash in. On the other hand, you could have been chipping away at those clues to feed into your second drawn card payoffs, and this is where the two themes don't get along perfectly well. It doesn't break the deck by any means, it just demands you to have that extra bit of awareness for each choice you make. And before we get to the upgrade section of the video, there is one last new spell. Follow the Bodies. This 2 and a blue sorcery has the incredibly rare Gravestorm ability, letting you copy the spell for each permanent put into a graveyard this turn. The spell you'll be copying? Investigate. Simplicity is nice sometimes. I can't say this thrives in a deck with only 2 board wipes that destroy things, but there will be times you can get half a dozen clues or so with this spell. Combine this with a handful more destructive board wipes in the deck, and then you'll be eaten good. Now it's time for upgrades and cuts, and I'm going to do this differently from how I normally go about these things. I'm going to stick with the 10 cuts, but because there are so many directions you can take this deck, I'm going to start by throwing out recommendations to patch up the holes I see first, and follow that up with the good stuff that may not be perfectly cohesive with each other, but great on their own and can be pieced together by you to take the deck on the path you choose for it. The ramp package in this deck is lacking. There's 8 artifacts, and then Tulane, Silvala, and On the Trail, which aren't even guaranteed hits. This is mitigated by a number of spells having affinity for artifacts, improvise, or even giving spells improvise. But when I'm in green and have access to the best ramping spells, I like to take advantage of them. In this case, the 2-mana spells like Farseek and Nature's Lore are what I'm after, so I can fix my mana, and if I kept a greedy 2-lander, find my 3rd land to cast Morska on turn 3. Explore is another great option that will get you ahead on lands, but also get you a second drawn card on your turn. Artifacts also matter in this deck, so a simple Celestia Signet will help out. The next hole to patch is a lack of interaction. There are 3 board wipes. There's a Swords, a counterspell, Junkwinder will tap things, Coma can be a jerk, but that's it. Outside of destroying all your own artifacts and enchantments as well, there's no way to deal with your opponent's cards of those types. One of the most hyped spells from Murders at Karlov Manor, Pick Your Poison, would be great here to do just that. It's a 1-mana edict for all opponents that can hit artifacts, enchantments, or creatures with flying. Nature's Claim is obviously good for another 1-mana solution. But then there are some that on the face of it are less efficient, but feel good in this theme. Root Out and Rending Vines hit both of those types, letting you investigate or draw. Topple the Statue and Filigree Fracture are more narrow in some respects, but again, the upside is there. You don't need all or even most of these, but having an out against these card types is worth having in your deck. Combining these ramp and removal sections we're in right now, Kellen Inquisitive Prodigy has an attack trigger that can destroy artifacts. You can even destroy your own artifact to draw a card. The adventure side, Tail the Suspect, gets you a clue token and also lets you put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. Kellen is showing up everywhere these days, and lucky for us, he fits in nicely with this precon. In terms of targeted interaction against creatures, I'm growing more partial to counterspells these days. Arcane Denial doesn't fall into the budget bucket, but is exactly what this deck wants. Remand is a budget option, and while it doesn't send the spell to the graveyard, it basically sets an opponent back a turn in tempo, and again, draws you that card. Another good part about these two is the single blue pip. In 3 colors, especially early game, your mana can get stretched thin, so it's nice to not have to stress about that. Okay, last hole to patch is non-clue related card draw. 2 mana to crack a clue for a card is fine. 0 mana if you have Tezzeret Betrayer of Flesh on the battlefield is hella based. But this deck needs a few more reliable, cheap ways to keep your card advantage and get those second drawn card payoffs. That way you aren't sinking as much mana into your tokens and have the option to keep them around, enabling the artifact matter payoffs. I like introducing more cards from the recent set, so we'll start with Deduce here. It's 1 and a blue to draw a card and investigate. It's nothing fancy, but if Benny Brax is on the battlefield, that would end up being 2 cards. If Erdwall Illuminator is out there, that'd be 2 clue tokens. All in all, much better than cracking a clue. Sticking with commons, I like Stern Lesson. It's a 2 and a blue instant to draw 2, discard 1, and create a tapped Power Stone token. It hits the 2 card mark on its own, and the Power Stone will do work for you. It helps with affinity, can cast any of the dozen-plus artifacts you have, and can crack clues. Thoughtcast is a generic good spell in artifact decks, where ideally you'll draw a couple of cards for a single blue mana. The last one, which almost feels necessary, is Brainstorm. You only net the 1 card in hand, but you are technically drawing 3 cards. Magic number is 2, you know the deal. Let's be done with the holes and get to the good stuff, starting with Martha Jones. She's a 2 and a blue 2/3 that investigates on ETB. She has this clue sacrifice payoff that goes hard in this deck, making her and a target creature unblockable until the end of the turn. If Morska is huge with counters, a win with commander damage with these 2 could be in your sights. Interestingly, it doesn't have to be a target creature you control that you can make unblockable. You will be cracking clues on your opponent's turns, so you can start wheeling and dealing about which creature you choose to become unblockable for them. Turns out the Doctor Who set had a lot of support for this mechanic, so I'll touch on one more from the universe beyond, 500 Year Diary. If you've watched LSV Draft Cube, I'm sure you've seen Tolarian Academy a time or two. This is a way worse version of this card, coming in tapped, but is still really strong when surrounded by clue tokens, tapping for a blue mana for every clue you control. This will at least be 1 on account of the artifact being a clue itself, but very easily will be 2 or 3, with an upward limit letting you cast Finale of Revelation for at least X = 10. Thousand Moon Smithy is an exciting card from LCI, creating a gnomish construct on ETB. If you manage to flip it over to be the land, Barracks of the Thousands, you can start creating even more of these creature tokens by using the land to cast artifact or creature spells. If you've got a token doubler out there, you'll be going wide and tall. Sir Ginger, the Meal Ender, deserves a shout out. Even if your opponents don't end up casting a Planeswalker, this creature will grow into a threat, accumulating counters as the game plays out, and more importantly, letting you scry as your artifacts are put into the graveyard. For the newer players, when you crack a clue token or a treasure or a food, they technically go into the graveyard, which would trigger Sir Ginger. Since it's a token, the physical manifestation of it disappears and the game goes on. Before we get to the pricier stuff, the last spell for this section is Tamiyo's Journal. It's 5 mana, and eventually, or likely the turn you play it, can be used to tutor any card from your library into your hand when you sacrifice 3 clues as payment. It also generates a clue token each upkeep on its own. Given the themes of this deck, you may not want to cash these in at every opportunity, but I can't overstate how good it is to have the exact right card at your fingertips when you need it. Also, Rise and Shine can be overloaded to turn all your clues into 4/4 creatures. Mondrak, Glory Dominus, and Jahaira, Friend of the Forest are among the best additions you can make. The first creature gives you more tokens, and the second one turns those tokens into mana rocks. Second Harvest is an instant that puts a copy of every token you control onto the battlefield. This spell on your opponent's end step, followed by Rise and Shine, sounds like a pretty good 1-2 punch to me. Krark Clan Ironworks can flip the script. Rather than having to pay 2 mana to sacrifice a clue, you can instead sacrifice the clue to receive 2 mana. Anyone that has played against this artifact knows how explosive it can be, and it'll be no different here. Last spell for the pricey reprints is Thorough Investigation, letting you investigate whenever you attack and venture into the dungeon when you sacrifice a clue. This isn't like the initiative where your opponents can steal it either. It's all yours to sit back and enjoy the value as you sacrifice your clues as a part of your already established game plan. Time for the 10 cuts, starting with our Scooby-Doo friend, Sophia and Tiny. This deck only has 1 dog, and paying 1 to sacrifice a clue to give that 1 dog 1+1+1 counter is not something I plan on doing. It's also 4 mana, so the chances of you being able to get Tiny out for an early game clue and Scooby snack isn't that high. Next is a spell I referenced earlier, Psychosis Crawler. It's one of two payoffs in the deck you have for keeping a large hand size. And while the damage will add up over the course of 3 or 5 turns, this isn't a wheel deck with Windfall and Teferi's Puzzle Box that will really chunk out your opponents. Follow the Body I think will be too unreliable at an upgraded precon power level to get that fat stack of clue tokens you're looking for, especially since it's sorcery speed. If you do end up going in the token doubler, Krark Clan Ironworks direction, you'll definitely want to reconsider keeping this one in. I also mentioned Serene Sleuth before. Getting rid of goad on all your creatures is really niche. You'll probably see a bit more of it in the near future thanks to the Blame game, but that's not really a mechanic I'm reserving a spot for in my 99 to counteract. This of course could change if this playstyle picks up more steam, but for now, I feel safe without it. Organic Extinction gets cut for one major reason. Unless your kelp has creaturefied all your clues, this deck doesn't have all that many artifact creatures. While it still can be an effective board wipe for only 2 mana, the off chance of facing down Urtet and his Legion of Mir, or any other artifact deck, would make this a dead card in my hand. Wave Sifter investigates twice on ETB and can be evoked out for 2 mana instead of 5. When I look at all the possible on-curve things I can do at 2 and 5 mana, this creature is at the bottom of both those lists. Selvala, Explorer Returned, has that parlay ability, making everyone reveal a card, hopefully getting you value, and then have everyone draw the card they revealed. I let this effect slide for the Innocuous Researcher on account of the ability to untap all your lands, but this creature isn't packing that kind of punch. When it comes down to it, Hornet Queen is expensive at 7 mana. The other creatures that are strictly 7 mana are Koma and Tangletrove Kelp. These are both doing more to impact the game in the vast majority of circumstances. So let's get that mana curve down and leave the queen for another day. The last 2 cuts are Magnifying Glass and Killer Service. The glass can investigate for 4 mana as utility, but I'm hard pressed to run a colorless 3 mana mana rock in any circumstance, and this one isn't changing that. Killer Service gives you food and can turn any token into a 4/4 Rhino token on your end step for 2 mana. I don't really mind the price, but the once per rotation restriction is a deal breaker. There you have it, the official MTG Monkeys Deep Clue C review and upgrades. Please like the video if you liked the video, hit that subscribe button, and please let me know in the comments your top add into the deck that I missed. I'll catch you next time for some more monkeying around.